Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Movies Are My Life. And I am so excited to have tonight's guest on. They're a Tony-winning producer. They are part of Ember Productions. I'm so happy to have you on. Maxwell Haddad. Maxwell, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Doing very good. Happy to talk about some movies that affected you. So before we get into the main meat and potatoes of the show, I always like to throw off as a little icebreaker. What is an early memory of a movie that you have?
Okay, so one of the earliest memories I have with a movie is somewhat unique. And I had to sort of go back through the annals of my mind to ensure that this memory was real and not something I fabricated. But for a brief period in 1994, when The Lion King came out, I was 7 years old. It had a very short run in 70 millimeter at Radio City Music Hall, which is like a 5,000 seat theater. It's normally for concerts or the Rockettes. But to like help hype up this movie, they had the world premiere there, and then they did a run that people could buy tickets for. And I vividly remember seeing it with my sister, and the screen was massive, and we were sitting pretty close. And I remember in that opening scene feeling like the elephants were going to step on me, or like the giraffes next. It was immersive just because of the sheer scope of it. That sequence in and of itself is incredible, but seeing it in 70 mil, I didn't at the time understand what 70 millimeter is, but looking back now and realizing why it felt so grand in scale. And then, if you've ever been to Radio City, the theater itself is stunning and gorgeous and has these incredible chandeliers. So that is definitely one of my earliest movie-going memories, and a specific moment where I remember being like, oh yeah, cinema's dope. This is great.
That's awesome. Like that sounds like that. What an awesome experience to have that young as a memory of seeing just an all-timer movie, but being in that way.
I actually just right before this was doing a little Googling, and people on eBay are selling the program that you were given when you bought a ticket. And I'm like, maybe I should get one of those to have for memory's sake for the collection. But yeah, it's really cool.
That's awesome. Well, we will get now into the main meat and potato of this show. First question that I always ask my guests: what is a movie character you see yourself in?
Of the three questions, this was definitely the hardest, because there was a TV character I see a lot of myself in. But then for movie characters, there were characters where I would see one aspect of my personality, or, oh, this character reminds me of certain things I've done. Instead of picking one of those, I decided to go with, I guess, something maybe a little more metaphorical or allegorical. You choose your word. And that is Elsa from Frozen, in particular, Frozen 2. Which, might seem like an odd choice, but I don't know. I feel like, especially in Frozen 2, which is why I specified that as opposed to the first movie. And I'm going to get personal here, which is what I assume the intent of this show is.
Yeah.
I found myself really taken with the portrayal of her character, and in particular, her journey of discovery. I was adopted. I was adopted at birth. And it's not necessarily a huge aspect of my life. It's not something I think about all the time. It's not as if I've gone on some quest to find my bio parents, although I have had some minimal contact over the years with my biological mother. And, my parents are my parents. I love my family. They're incredible. Much like Elsa, I think she loved her family, but in Frozen 2, she starts hearing the tones, and she feels like she's being called somewhere. And on this journey, she gets to get closer in touch with her identity and her roots. And I think to a certain extent, for me, I've always felt just a little out of touch with my roots and my identity. Because, again, my family's my family. I love them to pieces, and I have definitely taken a lot from them in terms of my personality, my customs, how I view the world, because they raised me and I love them. But there's still like a little notion of like person out of place. And in my darker moments, it is easy to retract back into like, well, of course I don't fit in with these people, right? Because there's one little thing missing. I also think Elsa's fascinating because she's sort of misunderstood. And that song Show Yourself to me is such a powerful anthem about saying to the world, I don't give, is cursing okay?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't give a shit what you think about me. I am just going to put everything about who I am and who I want to be, like the image I have of myself, because I think everyone has an image in their mind of who they want to be, how they want to present themselves, right? And I think in that song, Elsa has come to this fulcrum point. She's found out more information about her mother, about where she comes from, about her lineage. In that song, she's saying, I am proud to be exactly who I am. I don't care if you misunderstand me. I am just going to live out loud and proud. And that was something that really resonated with me, in particular, the journey I've gone on over the last 2 years, right? So I got divorced from an ex who it was not working out. I'm not going to go into a lot of more detail with that out of respect for them. It wasn't working out. And it felt like maybe the biggest act of bravery in my adult life to recognize this isn't working. I don't have to listen to what society says and try and make it work. I can put myself first. So coupled with that, I've really been on this journey of self-discovery over the last 2 years. And I feel that now I'm still very much a work in progress, but I'm at a point where I can finally just be me. I can use he, they pronouns. I'm on a like sort of journey of exploring my non-binary identity. I am proudly queer. And that's another thing with Elsa. I think there's a not so subtle subtext in Frozen 2 that she is very much a queer woman. I think she's flirting with Honeymaren in the forest. And my great hope in Frozen 3 is that Disney says F you to all of the, oh my God, Disney's so woke people, and just full on gives Elsa a same-sex love interest. That to me, like narratively, is the logical next step of the journey the character's on. So yeah, I mean, she's a Disney princess and she has magical powers, which obviously I don't have. I mean, I might be a little bit of a Disney princess depending who you ask, but there was just something about Elsa and in Frozen 2 that really resonated. And I saw a lot of similar journeys, although obviously very different scale. I did not ride a water horse or go into a mountain. I do sing many musical numbers, but no one tends to applaud after. So yeah, that's why, very long-winded version of why I picked Elsa.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that this was a character from a more recent film, 2019, and then you say this, journey kind of started for you in the last real 2 years. So would you say that Frozen 2, at the time, the first time you watched it, it really had that effect, or did that effect not really come until later?
So I definitely remember, so we saw the movie, it opened on Thanksgiving, as Disney animated movies often do. I was back home in South Florida with all my sisters, all their kids. So like 15 of us went, and like we had the whole row on that opening Wednesday, the day, I think it was probably the day before Thanksgiving, if I'm remembering correctly. And I definitely remember having almost like a visceral emotional reaction to Show Yourself, like sobbing in the theater to the point where my brother-in-law was like, bro, calm down. So I don't know if at the time I necessarily fully understood why I had that reaction. But I think maybe to a certain extent, it was like planting the seeds of me being able to go on this journey I've been on.
That's very interesting to me. That it was almost in the same way that Elsa hears that noise, but she doesn't quite know what it is yet.
Yeah.
That film almost had that exact noise proportion for you.
Yeah, and now we have a Frozen 2 poster up above the couch. So that movie, that's a great way to put it, actually. Maybe that movie was my like ethereal voice in the ether that was calling me towards being like, yo, show yourself. You don't have to hide anymore. And I think that's why I love Frozen 2. I think it's better than the first, which may be fighting words for some people. Certainly, I think the songs are better. But I think it has more complex themes that people can resonate with. I like the first one very much, don't get me wrong, but I think what they do in particular with the Elsa character in Frozen 2 and that Show Yourself song is what really takes it. Into the Unknown is great too, don't get me wrong, but
yeah. I watched it again, and I noticed more things this time than I had previously. But I'm curious again in terms of that kind of journey of self-exploration for you, and how it kind of reflects the elements that you see in Elsa. What has been kind of some of the toughest parts of this journey for you, of this kind of redefining yourself now?
I mean, there's like little things like, even something as simple as, my name is Maxwell. I used to go by Max a lot, and I don't like to go by that anymore. I either use Maxwell or Swell. In fact, I prefer to be called Swell. Maxwell's fine too. And then, changing or slightly altering pronouns, being more open about the fact that I'm pansexual, all these different things that maybe I used to just be a little quieter or more reserved about, I now see no need to hide. And these are definitely things, particularly with the current socio-political climate, that are scary. And there's more hate out there. At least I would say vocally, right? I think all this hate was there. And then because of certain people who have held certain offices and had certain followers, sort of galvanize these people who are sort of living in the shadows to emerge from the shadows and be like, I'm going to live out loud with my transphobia or my whatever it might be. So that's been difficult. But also there are times where personally I find myself having to remember or remind myself that it is okay to be exactly what I want to be. Because there are definitely moments based on the context where, and I think a lot of people do this, but you code yourself to better fit into a certain situation, whether it's a business meeting or you're going to dinner, or, you're meeting a different type of people than maybe you normally hang out with. There's certain aspects of yourself or your personality that you might tone down, right? So that's definitely been like a learning process for me to figure out where those lines are, how much of myself I can safely show to certain people, because, luckily for the most part, everyone in my day-to-day life has just been like, yeah, you do you. I'm very blessed for that. But there have been moments where even on Twitter, which, is a goddamn cesspool, I've gotten into like the most silly of discussions or debates, like about sports, right? Like I like this team, you like that team, blah, blah, blah. And then they see my pronouns listed as he, they in my bio, and they start coming at me with all the, homophobia, trans, whatever, you want to call it, all of that stuff. So just like the mere fact of like putting that in my Twitter and Instagram bio was a big day for me. I don't remember specifically, but it was about, I'm gonna say like 8 to 12 months ago now. And it's just learning that not everyone is going to accept you, and not everyone is going to always be kind to you. But if you can accept yourself and figure out how to be kind to yourself, fuck all those other people. That's on them. As long as they're not like stabbing me, you can think what you want to think. You're not hurting my life. You're not hurting my day. I'm not going to give you the power to make my day worse than it was.
That's a really healthy attitude in terms of that.
Well, it's taken years of therapy. But I try, and it's one of those things where, listen, this is a contextual thing, right? Like, I'm on a podcast. I know people are going to watch this and listen to it, and I'm imperfect. I make mistakes. Sometimes these things do hurt me, but it is the healthy attitude I try to live by. And I find that the more I say it out loud, either so other people can hear it, but also it just serves as a reminder to myself, like, hey, these people cannot control you. Like, words only have power if you let them have power over you. And something I've really worked on as well in the last 2 years is not letting the words people say about or to me hurt me like they used to.
That's very insightful. To go to the flip side of my question, what since this journey of self-discovery, what have been the most comforting or freeing or liberating moments for you?
It's been fun. Like, not to say that I was like hiding before. There was nothing like malicious or duplicitous, but I was definitely more reserved. And I definitely know people who have known me for years have noticed a marked difference that I've been told, right? I'm more carefree, I'm more silly, I make jokes that I maybe wouldn't have made before, I'm more like silly. It's just been like a really fun time to be like, you know what? Yeah, let's just be you and, go to the musical, whatever it might be, right? Just it's been fun. It's really been fun.
Well, that's really neat. That already this was I think a very insightful look at it. You seem to have I think despite the fact that and a lot of people tend to see this as the hardest question. I've gotten that from a lot of guests that this is the toughest question. I think sometimes it's because it's hard to acknowledge some of the good things about ourselves.
Oh yeah.
I
And
think
I think both the second and third question are experiential, and this one you're like directly having to like analyze and reflect on yourself, which is really fucking hard to do. Like, you find me any person alive who will sit there and say, I love writing cover letters. And I want to meet that person and talk to them because not it's sort of similar. Like, talking about yourself, especially in a positive light, is really challenging because you don't want it to, you don't ever want to be like arrogant or egotistical, or people, I think, more often than not are very self-deprecating and struggle with their being kind to themselves. So it's a hard question. It really is.
yeah,
But that means it's a good question.
It's absolutely a difficult question though. But I really admired your insight in yourself, and I feel like it was great to hear you talk about that. But moving on now to the second question: what is a movie that reminds you of a personal experience?
Okay, so I chose Chef 2014, written and directed by John Favreau. I don't like calling him John Favreau. Jean Favreau. Well, listen, there's sort of Frenchness in his last name, by John Favreau. And there's a couple elements in this movie that reminds me of a personal experience. But right off the gate, the thing you need to know about me is I grew up in a restaurant. When I was 4 years old, my mom opened a restaurant. She had it in Florida where I grew up until it was still open when I left for college. So literally grew up in the restaurant. When I got a little bit older, I would start going to work in the restaurant. I would help prep in the kitchen and, dice veggies for the salads, or, prepare the strawberries for dessert. Or sometimes I would work, on busy nights making coffee. And then when I got older, I was working at the front, running the door, basically like maitre d', like picking what tables people got, controlling, because it was tended to be a very busy restaurant. So right on its face, I have never seen a movie for me that more authentically and accurately captures what it's like to be in a kitchen, what it's like to be passionate about food and restaurants. But then you add in the fact that the real heart of this movie is the father-son relationship. And I saw so much of my mom and I in this because, especially when I was younger, and I'm sorry, Mom, if you ever watch this, I'm not trying to call you out. I'm just, speaking honestly about what happened. Like, restaurants are open late, right? So like, I would get home from school at 4:30. I'd be 6 years old. I'd be in sleep by 8, 9 o'clock, and she would work till 12 or 1 a.m. at the restaurant. So there was a lot of distance. She would come home and maybe have dinner with me or help me with my whatever. Like, she tried to make the time. But I think this movie really, really captures the strain either being a chef or running a restaurant can have on your family. That's why they say so many chefs never even have families, because you don't have time, right? Like, a kitchen job, if you're running a kitchen or working on the line in a kitchen, you're working like 80 hours a week or more, depending on how busy the volume of the restaurant. I could talk for hours about running restaurants. But So I think that this movie really captured that well. But also, and this is when I'm going to be nice to my mom, I think it also flips, and spoiling the movie a little bit here.
That's okay.
Has to happen to talk about these things. As the movie goes on, and Percy goes on the truck with his dad, and they go from Miami to New Orleans to Texas to California. They re-find their love for each other through food and through, a food truck is a restaurant. You can argue with me all day, through running a restaurant. It's just a very small restaurant on wheels, right? And like I said, as I got older, I started working in the restaurant. Like, I would take the bus home from school, but I wouldn't go home. I would take a bus and get dropped off like a block from the restaurant, walk the block, go sit in the booth and do my homework, and then either put on my apron or put on a blazer and go work in the front. And in those moments, my mom and I got to know each other and got to be colleagues. I was a kid or a teenager, but in some ways, I think it brought us closer together. So this movie really captured, like, thematically and in terms of feeling, a lot of what my childhood was like. But there's another aspect to it also. And that is, I think, if you listen to Jon Favreau talk about the movie, or you're familiar with his career, this movie was basically his response to the reaction to Iron Man 2. It was not as beloved as the first one. He had, if I'm not mistaken, Ike, Perlmutter, I can never say his name properly, was still working at Marvel. So Kevin Feige was not fully running the show like he is now. And you look at Iron Man 2 and you can see the seams, right? You could see that Favreau's trying to do what he wants to do, but he was also, because the first Iron Man was such a hit, single-handedly tasked with starting to build out what we now know is a 30-film behemoth MCU, right? He starts introducing new characters. You have Nick Fury running around. You have Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, and then it's like hinting at all these other things, which I think takes away from the movie, and the reviews were not as good. And I'm trying to think, did Cowboys and Aliens come out before Chef? But before Chef or after Chef?
Yes, before Chef.
Right. So that also came out before Chef, and that was very much, I think, where he was a studio gun for hire, right? I actually don't dislike that movie. I think it might be a little more fun than its reputation. It's not great. It's really messy, but it has some good stuff in it. But still, he got eviscerated, right? Like, after being like this, like, oh, Jon Favreau is like bringing new life to superhero movies and to the summer blockbuster, to then follow that up with the reaction to Iron Man 2 and Cowboys and Aliens, that is basically directly referenced in Chef, with the way you have Dustin Hoffman's character serving as the studio head, saying, no, you're going to cook my menu. You're going to play the hits. Don't do your artsy fartsy shit. Right. And then you have Oliver Platt, the critic, being like, he's doesn't have any passion for his work anymore. Right. So as someone who produces theater and works in entertainment and arts for a living, that's something else that really reminded me of like what I do, maybe not day to day, but experiences I had, where it is so difficult to find a healthy fulcrum point between being proud of the work you're doing, but also doing work that people want to see. Because as much as we like to sit here, you love movies, I love movies, and say it's art, and it is, but even the like smallest, most low budget indie movie ever made is still made in the hopes that it'll get distributed and that people will see it and buy a ticket to go see it. Right. So maybe I'm cynical about it because I sort of work in entertainment a little bit, but barring like you and me taking an iPhone and going to make a movie in our backyards to show our friends, there's always commercial notions in one's mind, right? You always hope that you make your money back, that people see it. That's really hard. And I think that's the journey that Chef Carl Casper, great name, by the way, such a great movie name. Chef Carl, it's great. Like, and I think also, and I'm sort of rambling here, but I think now is the right time for him to do a sequel, because with Jungle Book and The Lion King and Mandalorian, and now he has his stand in Star Wars, I think he could talk a lot about those experiences under the guise of the further adventures of Chef Carl Casper. But anyways, Carl's journey in the movie is both rebuilding the relationship with his son and becoming a better father, but also refinding his creative drive, finding what makes him excited to create art. Because again, I will fight anyone on this. Chefs are artists, and food is art. I mean, you watch Chef, and that's another great thing about the movie, right? Every food that you see in this movie looks fucking delicious. Even the grilled cheese, I'm like, I want to eat that grilled cheese. Like, food porn on film at its best, thanks to the great Roy Choi, who served as the chef consultant. Anyways, that journey resonated too and reminded me of a personal experience. Like, as I'm traversing working in the theatrical industry, which I started in 2016, and I've had some success, even picking what projects to spend my time on. Like, I'm now developing projects from the ground up as opposed to just joining projects later on and helping, and it's like, I don't ever want to sell out or feel like I'm doing something just because I think it's going to make me money. But in picking projects that I believe in and I love, there's still like a lingering thing in the back of the mind that's like, well, it still has to have the ability to make money, right? Like, anyone would be foolhardy, especially with theater, which is so much more fleeting, right? Movies, if it doesn't work in theaters, it could be a beloved hit that's made so much money in residuals down the line, like Blade Runner, or, choose your pick. There's millions of them. But theater, if your show doesn't work, no one goes to see it. Unless you get a good licensing deal in high school, start putting it on, like, that's it. You've failed. Maybe you've put your heart and soul into it, and that's beautiful. And I give immense credit and kudos to anyone who can, like, fully altruistically just do a project because they love it. But barring very, very few examples, I think whether it's film or theater or television, there is still some level of strategic thinking in even the most indie of films. Like, you're thinking to yourself, okay, this can go to the festivals and maybe Neon or A24 will pick it up. Or, this play may not be a huge hit in New York, but I think it will get licensed and regional theaters and schools will put it on. And so we will make our money that way while still believing in the product we did. And so that's why I think Chef is a brilliant movie, because it's working on many levels that happen to remind me of a lot of shit I've been through in my life.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. To kind of backtrack a little bit, and then we'll make our way back forward. I really liked the moment you talked about of actually working with your mom in the restaurant and how it kind of recontextualized your relationship with her.
Mm-hmm.
It almost became, and you can correct my wording if I'm wrong, almost became you two as colleagues,
Yeah.
rather than necessarily the parent and child relationship. Seeing your parent as a person.
Yeah. And I think too, especially, because I said, like, especially when I was younger, like, I would be asleep and she would come home from work hours later. There's like a notion of, like, where's she going? What, like, I knew, but you're still like, what is she doing? What's going on over there? It's sort of like she would disappear. And then I'd see her in the morning for breakfast before school, right? So when I got old enough to, and I was going to the restaurant and would eat there and spend some time there, but I was so young when it first opened. It was still very much just like, didn't even understand anything that was going on when you're like 5, 6, 7 years old. Like, you're still getting your grip on many things, but recontextualizing is a great way to put it, because it gave me clarity as to what it was she was doing and why she loved doing it. And I fell in love with it also, right? Like, I would love to own some sort of food service establishment one day. In fact, in 2017 and 2018, my mom and sister and I opened a restaurant in New York that didn't work as well. And luckily, like, looking back now, we closed basically right before COVID hit. So we kind of dodged a bullet. Like, maybe we somehow knew something was, I don't know. But so because God, restaurants struggled so bad during COVID. It was such a mess. But yeah, like, it's one of those things where when you finally get to, like, peek back behind the curtain and see what it is your parent is doing all day, and then realizing, oh, this is something that I also love and find really rewarding, and oh, I'm going to actively choose to spend my time here helping it, was awesome. And the other thing is, like, for better or worse, it was named after me. It was called Maxwell's Chop House, which, when you're like 6-7 years old, you have a restaurant named after you. It's very surreal. Because I remember my mom would tell me, like, I'm sure you'll be surprised to hear that people in this world are misogynistic, right? They would come up to complain, as, go full Karen, as people are wont to do, especially in South Florida. And they would be like, we need to speak to who's in charge. And my mom would be like, yeah, how can I help you? And they'd be like, no, we need to speak to Maxwell. And she'd be like, well, he's over there playing with his Legos. I'm not so sure he can help you, but I'm in charge. And then she said, like, people would be like, well, then can we talk to your husband? And she'd be like, yeah, he has a real estate company. He doesn't know what the fuck is going on in this restaurant, but you can talk to him about that if you want. But yeah, so that was kind of weird too, like having a restaurant named after you. I had no choice in the matter. My sisters, I'm sure, were like, why don't you name it after me? I don't know.
That's very funny. I'm just imagining at one point if your mom actually like called you over and be like, you just yes, what's the problem?
How can I help you, sir? All right, I'll talk to your mom instead.
I like that. Yeah. You can be the blue race car and I'll be the red race car.
Yeah. Which character do you want in Mario Kart? Oh, you'll take Yoshi? Great. So
that's funny. The other interesting thing, back over to the other half of your chef experience was I might have the wrong kind of angle because I only have vague understanding of what you do in terms of the theater world, but you have, like, correct me if I'm wrong, you've invested in shows, right?
At times I have, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that because that's coming more from the Dustin Hoffman angle,
yeah,
rather than the Jon Favreau angle. So I'm curious, as someone who is kind of on both sides, has been on both sides of that dynamic. What are the biggest differences for you?
It's okay. So I know, like I said, I've been working in theater in one way or another since 2016, and I've met all kinds of people, right? And if we're just talking about being an investor, which is awesome, if you are lucky enough to be able to do it and you've had success, and I'm very grateful and blessed that I've been able to do this and use my investing to build a producing company and do more like not legitimate work, but more like tactile work, we'll say. You come across people who are just like millionaires and they're looking for new places to park their money and hope they get a good return on their investment. And they don't give a shit what the show is. They're like, is this going to make money? Great. Here's my money. And, they put their money in Doubtfire the musical, or, you choose your pick of shows that seem like they might do well and then maybe don't, because Doubtfire didn't. But, all they're interested in is the commercial prospects of it, which is kind of the Dustin Hoffman character, right? That's, maybe we say someone like Scott Rudin, and I'm picking him specifically because he got rightfully, for lack of a better term, pushed out of the industry. He was canceled, which I don't love the notion of canceled. To me, it's just someone finally being held responsible for their bullshit. But Scott Rudin was someone who, he did his movie stuff, but he was also one of the major figureheads in producing theater up until a couple years ago, when all of the dirt that everyone knew but was too afraid to say finally came spilling out, right? And Scott Rudin, I think to a certain extent, did love the art of theater, but he was still very much financially driven, right? So he would be the Dustin Hoffman. He would want to play the hits. He wouldn't be as interested in what Dustin Hoffman's character called the artsy fartsy shit, although Scott Rudin did ultimately produce some artsy fartsy shit. But he would, interestingly, this is a poorly kept secret and kind of illegal, actually, if my understanding of SEC regulations are correct, which they may not be. But like, if he would have 2 shows in a season, right, one that had much stronger commercial prospects on paper and one that was more of a risk, when he or his co-producers were trying to find investors, he would say, yeah, you can get in on this show A, which I think is going to make 30% return on your investment, but you also have to invest in show B, which might lose you some money, but we still need the budget to put it up on stage. So he would make people couple it. Maybe it is legal. I don't know. I don't want to speak out of turn. It's, to me, there's some at least ethical consideration. Anyways, and there are also now, and we've seen this become a little more prevalent in the last few years, there are Broadway hedge funds, right? Where there's 2 or 3 at least really legitimate ones. And I have so much respect for what they've done, because for those investors who only want to put their money in theater to make money and are not as interested in the art of it or the love of theater, or like they like theater, but they don't like it enough to like really sit down and think, well, I really like the theme of this show and that director did great work and I'm going to be proud to say that I'm involved in this piece. They just want to be like, oh yeah, I invested in theater and made my money back. So the hedge funds are legal, and you give your money to the hedge fund, and then the fund will put a little bit into this show, a little bit into that show, a little bit into that show, which mitigates your risk a little bit more, because if one show fails but another one hits, then you're potentially making a return regardless. And I feel like that's something that the Dustin Hoffman character would want to do. He'd be like, yeah, I have all this money. We've been a success in this restaurant. I want to dabble in theater, so let me give it to one of these hedge funds. So I can say, yeah, I invested in theater. Well, I don't know what shows. Right. So for me, even from the get, when I first started doing it, I was conscious about what shows I was picking. And it was what I was talking about with strategy, right? Like I had to believe in the show, whether it's I thought it was a story worth telling or artists involved who I respected. Like I wanted to be able to put my head on the pillow at night and feel proud about the work that in one small way or another I had my hand in, but also have some thought that, yeah, this could potentially make some money and do all right, and people are going to like it. I'm not going out there throwing out money just because I love something, because then I'll have no money and, I have to pay rent, like, if I was Elon Musk, sure, great. Here, you get $1 million, go put on your shows, kids. Fine. Right. But I've done okay. I've had my success, but I still am very conscious, because one mistake and like I could lose everything. Right. Like I'm not some incredible millionaire. I'm just very strategic in how I choose to do these things. But you come across a lot of people who don't give a shit about the art, and that's fine. And you need those people. You need those people's money to put on these shows, because Broadway budgets are just getting more and more expensive. They really are. It's tough. It's tough to make money on Broadway.
That sounds difficult. One last question I have for you, and it's kind of in the same theme, but now from the other side. I know you were recently involved in developing the show In the Trenches.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very curious as how this theme of kind of balancing the artistic and the commercial, what that was like in that process for you.
So In the Trenches is kind of my baby right now, my and Amber's baby, our company, Ember Productions. We're the lead producers on it. It's a show born out of Colorado by these two incredibly talented, a couple named Graham and Christina Fuller. She went to NYU for music studies and music theory, and now she's a voice teacher, and he's a lawyer. And they're parents. And the story goes, they both loved musical theater. They both had talent. They were living in Colorado. He's lawyering, she's teaching lessons, and they wanted to perform. So I don't know if you're familiar with The Last 5 Years.
Yes.
So they self-produced and performed in a small production of The Last 5 Years. They played the roles. It did all right. They had fun. And then they said, well, what's the next logical step? We should do a musical about parenting. But then they went to look and they couldn't really find anything, or at least anything remotely decent. So they were like, well, we'll do it ourselves. So they spent like the last 7 years or so writing this musical. And last summer, because of people I've met and Amber's met in this industry working, they got networked to us, and we saw a concert of the songs and immediately fell in love with it. And we felt the fact that we are not parents but still loved it so much meant we had to do this project, because I think strategically, there's that word again, it shows how it's not just a show for parents. Because when you think about it, if you aren't a parent, you probably had them, right? I mean, obviously, unfortunately, there are some people out there not lucky enough to have parents, and I'm, understanding of that. But or like you've been to a restaurant and you've seen like the mom arguing with the kid who's like throwing whatever it is, right? In some way or another, you have probably experienced either firsthand or secondhand the frustration of being a parent with young kids is, right? So we fell in love with this musical, and we're like, we have to join this team, develop it, and guide it towards getting it on a stage in New York, which has been honestly the most work I've ever done on anything in my life, including my like other day job, anything, but also the single most rewarding thing I've probably ever done. It has been, and we're like basically like a third of the way on this journey. Like we're taking a breather because we did a 29-hour reading in March. 29-hour reading basically that's like equity. Actors Equity is the stage actors union code for a week's worth of work, where between the rehearsal time and the final performance on the last day, the actors cannot work more than 29 hours because they're getting paid the like agreed upon money for a reading. They're not, anyways, I don't need to bore you with all those details, but the point of it is on the last day, you do a reading for potential other investors and producers. And so we did that in March, and now we're strategizing on next steps. And the hardest part of producing is like, I find it very easy to like creatively give input, to like hire people to pick all that stuff. The hardest part is being like, hey, give me your money. That's not an easy thing for anyone. So that's sort of where we're at now, is strategizing on what to do. But even though we didn't write it, I still feel like I think I said earlier, like it's my baby. Like I feel so tied into it. And in that regard, like I feel like In the Trenches is our food truck. And, at this point, and then hopefully it will then be our restaurant that he gets to open with his former enemy and now backer, Oliver Platt, in the next, year or so. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be very neat. Hopefully you get to eat some Cubanos.
God, Cubanos are so good. By the way, when I rewatched Chef for this, I've seen it so many times, but like, when those like prompts go around Twitter that are like, name an actor who the second they show up in a movie makes it better. Oliver Platt.
Oliver Platt.
For like the last 30 years, when Oliver Platt shows up in something, it could be the biggest piece of trash. He enhances it just by his presence. And he always understands the assignment. Even in a small part like in Chef, he is perfect.
Did you ever watch The West Wing?
Of course.
Yeah. I love Oliver Platt in that. But for me, have you ever seen the movie Bulworth?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the scene where Oliver Platt and Joshua Malina do cocaine in a bathroom?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like Will Bailey and Oliver Platt.
Yeah.
They're doing coke in a bathroom. It was just so funny for me as a West Wing fan to see that. Anyway, to move on to the third question, what is a movie that gives you hope?
Okay, so sort of like with the first answer, I picked a movie from a series I picked Before Sunrise. I actually went back and forth on if I wanted to pick Sunrise or Sunset, not Midnight, because Midnight is a brilliant film, but I assume you've seen all three, but a whole other thing they're doing at Midnight. But I think, in answering the past two questions, I think we've sort of talked about, to a certain extent, how the sociopolitical climate these days is tumultuous, complex. I don't know. It fucking sucks, right? Like I don't need to pull out my brain thesaurus. I'm just gonna. It's awful, right? Like there's hate and there's division and there's fighting, and it's scary, right? Like you never know what the new day is gonna bring, what horrific news story you're gonna read, what right the government is gonna try and strip away from us next, whatever it may be. And I think for me, in my 35 years on this fiery rock hurtling its way around the sun, the only thing I think that can save us is human connection and empathy. I think we are in a time where there is a like massive, massive, massive dearth of empathy. And empathy and connection is what separates us from other species and creatures, I would argue. Not our ability to communicate, because I think other animals can communicate, they're just not speaking English, right? But it's that ability to like excuse me, like sit here with you and look you in the eye, even though we're in different states on a Zoom-esque thing, and have a conversation and get to know each other better. And Before Sunrise is so simple in construction, right? It's two people, they meet on a train, and they spend one day walking around and getting to know each other. And they form a really powerful connection, which obviously gets explored in two further films, making up what I think is arguably the greatest trilogy that cinema has seen. Certainly, top 3, if want to say, maybe you want to put Back to the Future up there. There's a lot of other ones I might have put up there in the past, but now they have 4th and 5th movies. So it's like, well, sorry, Toy Story, you're not a trilogy anymore. Anyways, it is so simply designed, but it gives me such hope to answer the question, because it says to me that at any time you can meet someone and just end up having a conversation with them and form that connection and get to know them better and have empathy for each other, share experiences. And that's it for me. Like that's what's gonna save us. I think there are so many. I'm sorry, my throat is giving me trouble. Excuse me one second. I think there are, like, earlier I was talking about like Twitter fights, right? And like Twitter is what it is, but I think we've seen those sort of heated arguments now extending out into the way people treat other people in the real world. Like you hear these stories about like people attacking other people because they're a different race or a different sexuality or a different gender or they're trans. And I think that stems from, the manipulation of Republicans and Fox News and all that garbage. But also, we are naturally scared of what we don't know and understand. That's human nature. But if people would just take, and maybe I'm naive, that's fine, take time to talk to someone who's maybe a little different than them, a stranger, like in Before Sunrise. I mean, they're both, very attractive white actors. Fine. But still, they come from very different walks of life. She's French, he's American. They just they have this like unspoken connection, and they just have the most magical day because they took a leap of faith to get to know each other. And I find that so endlessly hopeful. And Before Sunset also, I think, the notion that something that might seem fleeting can find its way back to your life. And then God, that ending of Before Sunset is just perfect. But even doing this, like, I people are going to watch this, right? Because that's what happens. And maybe they'll learn something about me. Maybe they'll think of something a different way. Maybe they'll want to talk to me or talk to you because you're a great guy and you have a lot of interesting things and insight and great taste in movies and very good at Disney trivia and all that good stuff. Like, conversation. And that's why I find this movie so hopeful.
What do you think the biggest barrier is to that, to people, actually getting to know each other? Do you think it's just like the social anxiety of today? Do you think it's that we kind of build up who people are in our minds and don't take that time? What do you think the biggest barrier is?
I don't know if there's one answer. I think it's depends on the context. But I think to a certain point, it's the old saying, like, don't judge a book by its cover. But I think a lot of people do, both for books, movies, whatever, but also people, right? Like, it is so easy, so fucking easy to walk down the street or go to McDonald's or go to Barnes and Noble or ride the subway or go wherever you go and see someone, and based just on what they're wearing or their facial expression or how their hair is cut, make every assumption about that person and think you know them, and think to yourself, not only do I not want to know that person, I need to step away because they're different than me, and I find that scary. And maybe that person is scary. You don't know. But if you're able to take that leap of faith that Jesse and Celine take, right? Maybe you will find that this person is not at all what you assumed and are actually a really lovely person worth getting to know, but maybe society has fucked them over and thrown them on the wrong path. Maybe it's laundry day and they're wearing their suit. You don't know, right? You don't know until you sit down and have a face-to-face conversation with someone. You don't know anything about them, and anything you think you might know about them is an assumption. And everyone knows what they say about assuming.
Yeah.
Even if you're right, you were still wrong to assume, when you can take the time out of your day to get to know something better or educate yourself. And I think that's part of it too. Like, in the social media age, in the talk radio age, the cable networks becoming, on both sides, honestly, increasingly radical in their viewpoints. People do not take it upon themselves to research and learn. And I think that extends to the way we perceive other people. Like COVID. Like, people are out there spewing so much nonsense because they thought they knew better, or because they heard Tucker Carlson saying something on his show. But if they had said, oh, that's interesting, let me do a little bit of my own research and make up my own mind about it, maybe they would have a more logical or educated viewpoint. But people don't do that, right? You hear one person say something, you take on Facebook or on TV or on the radio, or someone a coworker maybe says, blah, 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 didn't actually happen, or whatever it may be, and you take it for gospel. And then it becomes part of your reality. I think that extends to people also. We do not take extra time to get to know things or people better because it takes work and people are lazy.
We like to view people in snapshots rather than in video.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
and this movie is such a lovely testament to what can happen if you just talk to someone. And that gives me hope.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, to kind of bring it full circle, that's what I try to do with this show, is I try to take these personalities from trivia or what have you that people kind of see just one angle of. And I try to, that's why I like the idea of doing a more personal show, because I like to get people as a whole, not just one aspect of them, even if that one aspect isn't necessarily negative.
And that's why I think it's a great show, honestly. And when you sent me the question prompts, I was like, oh shit, this is actually going to take work and thought. Like, someone could have me on their podcast to talk about Chef, and I could easily talk about the movie for half an hour because I've seen it so many times. But the notion of having to make it personal and tie it back into yourself, you have to be thoughtful about that. And I think that sets the show apart. Not casting aspersions on anyone else's show, because there's a lot of incredible shows out there, both in spaces that you and I sort of know each other from, but also just in the movie sphere in general. And there's some terrible ones too. but the personal touch makes it unique and special, and it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. Well, that does about wrap us up. But Swell, I want to thank you so much. This was an excellent episode. I really enjoyed your perspectives on a lot of things. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And now I need to go drink some hot tea because my throat hurts and I spoke for an hour straight.
That is fair. Well, I will let you do that. Thank you to Swell again. Thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you to the Video Store for hosting this. We will see you later. Have a good one, everybody.